The Mystery of the Pirate's Treasure, Chapter 9, Sand Dollar. Chris woke the next morning to find sun shadows playing through the long windows in his bedroom. In spite of the fact that Mike was already up, Chris lay in bed. He hated to get up and face the music. He tried his best to go back to sleep, but he could not. As Mr. Kramer suggested, Mom had refrained from launching in last night about the trouble and anxiety they'd caused. She had just given them some soup and put them to bed. Now, all that awaited him, Chris knew everything would be blamed on him. As his mother and father were always reminding him, he was the older. Whatever he did influenced Mike. Even though Chris was sick and tired of hearing all that these years, he knew he was in for it once again. If only things had turned out as he had planned, if he could have found even a tiny clue to the treasure, anything. But no, there was nothing, and now he had to face the humiliation of admitting his foolishness. No doubt Nicole would be right there listening to it all. Chris had turned restlessly under the light covers. Suddenly he had an idea. Maybe he could be sick. His stomach didn't feel so good. His mom wouldn't be too hard on him if he was sick. That was it. He would just stay in bed. He might even be sick until the time to go back to Greenville. But then the thought of lying in bed for all those days, he let out a heavy sigh. Chris, the weight of his mother's body tilted the mattress as she sat on the edge of the bed. There was no use. This was it. Yes'm? Turn over this way. Placing his hand on his stomach that was really beginning to hurt now, he slowly turned to meet his mother's steady gaze. How on earth did it happen that you got locked in the dungeon? What did Mike tell you? Very little. He's still quite shook up over the whole affair, so I haven't questioned him. Well, Chris let out another long sigh. That poor guide was so upset, his mother said. Of course, we were all upset. You can't imagine what a fright you gave us. Well, Chris started again, racking his brain for some way to evade his mother's question. It wasn't any fun, being shut up in the dark with all those fake people. The guide just couldn't understand how she could have missed seeing you. She said she always checks so carefully. And then Mrs. Martin put her hand on her son's cheek, forcing him to look straight into her soft brown eyes. Chris, did you deliberately hide from her? Well, yes, ma'am. I guess you could say that's what happened. His mother's voice gained momentum. But why? Why on earth would you do such a foolish thing? At that moment, Mike appeared at the doorway. For once, Chris was glad to see his brother. Are you going to let us go, Mom? Mike asked. Go? Go where? Chris spoke eagerly in an effort to change the subject. Still looking gravely at him, his mother said, Mr. Kramer wanted to take you boys and Nicole camping at the beach, but I'm not sure at all that it would be wise after last night. Forgetting to hold his stomach, Chris shot straight up in bed. I'll be so good. Honest, Mom. Please. I think you would be, Chris. Certainly last night's crisis should hold you for a while, but your father wouldn't approve of my not punishing you for the anxiety you caused. I know that. Then don't tell him. Please, Mom? Now, you know I don't hide things from your father, Chris. That's what I'm trying so hard to teach you and Michael. There's no need to be sneaky around people you love and trust. I'll remember that, Mom. Honest, I will. Golly, if we go back home and haven't been to the beach, that'd be awful. Chris felt his mother weakening. They'd gotten off the subject of why they had wanted to stay in the dungeon after hours, and that was a help. But he just had to go to the beach. He just had to. Finally, his mother relented. All right, Chris, if you honestly think you can use a little more common sense. Chris caught Mike's surprised expression when he reached over and hugged his mother around the neck. I will, he said. I promise. Time flew by as they prepared for the camp out. Mr. Kramer always kept his basic camping equipment ready to go, since the Kramers often slipped up the coast to the quiet of Sand Dollar Campground. When they were all loaded up in the Kramer's sports car with the camping gear tied on top, Chris's mother and Mrs. Kramer stood in front of the old inn to wave goodbye. Okay now, Francis, said Mr. Kramer, you make Meta show you the town. You bet, she smiled, and in the next breath she called, be good, boys, and they were off. Chris liked the way Mr. Kramer whizzed around in the little sports car. The day was perfect as they headed through the Saturday morning traffic to Highway 17. Chris had purposely avoided looking at Nicole while they were getting off, and he tried not to as she sat in the front by her father, her expression as aloof as ever. Could she possibly not have heard about last night? Thankfully, Mr. Kramer was acting as if it hadn't even happened. As they began the dips and swells of the Great Cooper River Bridge, Chris looked out across the water dotted by marshland. Out on the horizon, he could see the clear, free flight of birds along the shoreline. Large ships lay at anchor. When they came down from the giant roller coaster of the soaring bridge, they found oleanders lining a road with marshland on either side. Mr. Kramer kept to the right, taking them to Mount Pleasant. Along the way, he pointed out a fleet of shrimp trawlers and deep-sea fishing boats. Tiny puffs of clouds dotted the blue sky. Chris watched great birds flap and sail over the dancing water. Farther on, they crossed a drawbridge over the inland waterway. A short distance ahead, Mr. Kramer showed them Fort Moultrie. One time when you're down, he said, we'll have to go on a tour of the old fort. It has an underground powder area. Chris cringed. He'd had enough of anything underground for the time being. Oh, said Mike, I've heard of Fort Moultrie. That's where Osceola, the Seminole hero, is buried, isn't it? Yes, it is, answered Mr. Kramer, and I hear you're quite a history buff. Well, I like reading history books, said Mike. For the first time since they'd begun, Nicole spoke. Tell them about Poe, Dad. I don't know whether you fellows have heard of Edgar Allan Poe or his story, The Gold Bug, said Mr. Kramer, but he was stationed here at Fort Moultrie, and this is where he set that story. I have, said Chris, glad to have something for once over Mike. Miss Tootin read The Gold Bug to us last year. As they traveled up the coast to Sand Dollar, they moved past trees with many huge branches, which were as big as most tree trunks, spread out like giant octopuses. Chris had never seen anything quite like it. How he would love to have trees like that at home. What great tree houses they would make. Soon the roadside was bordered by houses. Most of them faced the beach, with gazebos built just this side of the dunes. Sea oats blew gently in the ocean breeze. Chris felt all tingly with excitement. He could hardly wait to get into the water. Then something Mr. Kramer said caused his heart to skip a beat. I do hope we'll be able to get a campsite. Do you mean we may not? Asked Chris. Oh, I think they're plenty early enough, but they don't have many places at Sand Dollar, and they do fill up fast. For some reason, Chris didn't enjoy the view quite as much from then on. He couldn't bear it if they didn't get to stay, but his worries were short-lived. Soon they reached Sand Dollar and pulled into a veritable paradise. Mr. Kramer parked the car just inside the entrance near large water oaks gnarled from their battles with the sea winds. Do they let you climb these trees? Chris asked Nicole as her father got out into the office. Sure, but they're awfully dirty, she said. Well, you can always wash in the ocean, Chris laughed. I suppose so, Nicole answered. They could hear the roar of the ocean just a short distance away. More than anything at the moment, Chris wanted to run down near the water and explore. But he'd promised his mother he'd be good, and he imagined that meant helping set up camp first. Soon, Mr. Kramer returned with a big smile. How lucky can you be? We get to camp right on the ocean. He started up the motor to move the car to their site. They don't let trailers use these spots, so we're lucky we have tents. We'll have the whole dune all to ourselves. Gosh, said Mike as they headed toward the ocean. You mean we get to camp right on top of the dune underneath that tree? He pointed ahead. Sure thing, said Mr. Kramer, bringing the car to a halt just a few feet away. And that's about as close to nature as you can get. I'll say, said Chris, hopping out. Puffing out his chest, he pulled in the smell of the sea. He exhaled and whistled through his teeth. Tell you what, said Mr. Kramer, let's set up camp and grab a bite to eat, and then we can really relax and enjoy the day. Chris had to admit this was a good idea, even if he was dying to get in the water. Setting up camp proved to be very little work, as Mr. Kramer had everything organized and the tent stakes labeled. He let Mike and Chris put their gear in the smaller tent near the ocean, while Mr. Kramer and Nicole prepared sandwiches on the picnic table. Chris and Mike hopped into their swimsuits. After they'd eaten, Mr. Kramer reminded them that they shouldn't actually swim until their sandwiches had settled, and that a shirt would protect them from the sun. For some reason, Chris thought of his mom. Even though the sun didn't feel hot at all under the cooling ocean breezes, the boys donned shirts and ran to explore the beach. There's a nice illustration of those trees they were talking about in their campsite on the beach. The smooth, damp sand grabbed at their feet. The sounds and smell of the sea were all about them. As far out as Chris could see, there seemed to be no division between the sea and the sky. Flocks of raucous seagulls screamed in the distance. Just a few scattered campers were on the beach now. As Chris and Mike ran, the strong swell of waves lapped at their knees. They were in another world. Suddenly, Chris yelped and in a spasm kicked out his leg. A crab scuttled across the damp sand. "Hey, look," Chris called his brother. Standing wide-legged in the swirling foam, they watched a starfish, its arms swaying elegantly in the surf. "Get him," called Chris. "Do they bite?" "Heck, I don't know." Before the boys could decide, a wave swished the starfish away. Unable to take everything in, they dashed from one spot to the other. About their feet, hundreds of little periwinkles buried into the sand. Running along the stretch of smooth white sand, they picked up unusual conches, shells. Chris put a large one to his ear to hear the sound of the sea. "How's it going?" someone asked, and the boys looked up to see Mr. Kramer and Nicole. "Great," said Chris. "We just found a starfish." "We'll have to dry some out for you to take back," said Mr. Kramer. "Dry them out?" asked Mike, still eyeing the water moving with life beneath his feet. "Otherwise, they have quite an odor," said Mr. Kramer. "You know, the starfish can do something most other creatures, including man, cannot do. If it is cut into 5 pieces, each point of the star will grow into a new animal." "Really?" asked Chris. "But don't cut one," said Nicole, and looked up at her father. "All right, Miss Soft-Hearted, we won't," he said. Soft-hearted, thought Chris. He looked at Nicole and was surprised at how pretty she looked in her sea blue swimsuit. "Have you seen a sand dollar yet? That was what the campsite was named for." Mr. Kramer searched the bubbling water. "No," the boys chorused. "But I know what they look like," said Mike. "They're flat, aren't they? And thin." They moved on down the beach where they found lots of sand dollars. Some had washed ashore and were dead. Others moved along with their hair-like spines in the edge of the ocean. Indeed, they could see why the campsite was called Sand Dollar. They stooped around one that had baked in the sun while Mr. Kramer told them the legend of the sand dollar. "You see," he said, "this little sand dollar is said to tell of the birth and death of Jesus." Pointing out the holes in the sea urchin, he said, 4 of these were the nail holes made on the cross, and the 5th one was made by a Roman spear. Even though Nicole had heard the story many times, she listened as attentively as the others while her father told it again. He turned the sand dollar over in his hand to show the other side. "This side," he said, "is said to be the Easter lily. In the center is the star the shepherds saw. Now, if you break it open," he continued, breaking open the now brittle sand dollar, "you will release 5 white doves to go spread peace and goodwill." "Wow," said Chris. "Mom would like that," said Mike. "I expect your mother already knows it, Mike. It's an old legend. In fact, you can find it printed on postcards. Perhaps we can find one for you to take home with your sand dollar." "That'd be neat," said Chris. For a while longer, they walked on the edge of the dancing surf, picking up odd shells as souvenirs. Finally, they had pockets and hands filled. Some of the shells were striped or speckled. Others were richly glazed over with color. Many were perfectly shaped and filled with sea murmurs. "Suppose we go unload our treasures and jump some waves," Mr. Kramer offered. "Really, the early morning is the best time to find the most unusual shells along the shore." He didn't have to say it twice. Moments later, they were bounding into the salty, adventurous sea. Chris was surprised to see Nicole dive under a wave, drenching her long hair. He thought she looked like a sea nymph when she came from beneath the sea, and Chris found himself looking at her again and again. The squeals of other campers who had come down to the shore rode to them on the waves. They jumped roaring breakers and floated in on waves spreading out around them. Laughingly, they held back against the tide, pulling them out to sea. "Hey," yelled Chris above the roar of the ocean, "I just stepped in a hole." Sometimes a wild burst of spray filled their eyes and noses with salt water. Incoming waves slapped them from both sides and streamed hair over their faces. Now and then the waves took control and rushed them amid spewing foam to the grinding sand of the shoreline. Frothy ripples swirled around them. Before they knew it, the sun had worked its way around and dropped low over the sea. Chris couldn't remember when he had ever had such a good time. Neither could he get over how friendly Nicole had been. She hadn't been afraid of the huge breakers like most girls would be. She had been fun. Chris kept turning these things over in his mind as they walked, chilly and dripping, up the warmth of the bathhouse showers. While Mr. Kramer grilled hamburgers for their supper, the sun made a blazing path across the sea. They watched the changing colors of the moving water, red, turquoise, purple, and gray, until the sun sank into the haze of the horizon. Lonely birds were black against the sunset, their wings lifted high. By the time they finished eating, the glow of moonlight lay around them. The sprawling old oaks held shadowy, lurking pieces, yet they weren't scary shadows. They were hauntingly sad. Chris thought the whole place had a kind of dreamlike quality about it. "Look," said Nicole, "there's a falling star. Make a wish." Each made a secret wish as they sat there in the breeze and listened to the sound of the sea. Then Chris caught sight of another star that had just begun to twinkle for the night. "We used to say a poem about the first evening star when I was little," he said. "Me too," said Nicole, and they all laughed and began together. "Star bright, star alight, the first star I see tonight. Wish I may, and wish I might, have this wish I wish tonight." They were still caught up in their happy mood when the excited voices of other campers caught their attention. "Bring a lantern," someone shouted from up on the beach. "It must be the sea turtles," exclaimed Mr. Kramer.